Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sam Elliott64, and welcome to the RoboCast. I'm joined alongside,
Steve the American Killjoy.
Well, the Woodrow.
and we are joined by a guest to talk about the sixth and final episode of BattleBots Bounty Hunters, including Son of Whyachi. Introduce yourself.
I'm John Mladenik of Gigabyte.
John, welcome. It's been quite the series for you, or quite the season for you, I suppose, if we're talking American, I suppose. It's been quite the adventure, really, because you started off with obviously that amazing fight with Copperhead right at the very beginning, and I thought, oh no, because it was clear that improvements had been made last season in particular. You really stepped on quite a lot from 2018, and then obviously things happened with Witch Doctor and Huge, which meant that you had to kind of. I want to say you were meant to fight Son of Whyachi in the Win and You're In last year, weren't you?
We were, yeah. They announced that fight, but at that point, we had lost all our motor controllers. We lost like 5 of them, and they were all. We later found out it was all because of software. We had installed the wrong software into them, and that was just a disaster. And I even was thinking of going out to fight them without the spin weapon, but then I just thought it wasn't fair, to the fans. And they ended up they actually fought Copperhead, and
I know
they went and grabbed Copperhead to take our place, which was a great fight. It was
so memorable.
Good choice for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously in some kind of irony, you end up fighting each other this year. And then, we'll get to the second time later on, but the first time was, you must be having flashbacks to when you fought Tombstone, because it was just
when that
coming
Tombstone happened. I was in China when Tombstone happened, but it came down to the same exact thing. Those were 2 spindles. That's the main thing in a robot, and they were both made in China, and they didn't use 6061 T6. Their quality manager tried to explain, we took 6061 and we melted it into a big piece, and then we machined it, so it was 6061. It's like, no, it's not T6. I get upset just thinking about it. And I had thought I'd taken that out of our spindle list, because we have spare parts, and I didn't. It was my mistake. I did not keep track of it well enough, but it did do a bunch of fights in China. That one definitely did at least 7 or 8 fights and never had a problem. But there's no hit like Copperhead in China.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. It's another level, I suppose, over in the US. But obviously, it ended up being quite the season for you. You ended up breaking into the top 16. You had a lot of great fights. I think the fight with Malice was incredible as well, where just the sheer number and brutality of the hits was incredible. Looking back, obviously we'll get to the episode a bit later, but obviously this was a marked improvement, surely, from your end, looking at everything, thinking, wow, it's a leap forward.
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of things came together for us to do so well, and it's an iteration going, from the time I first came back and Invader got stuck on for 45 minutes, costing them $100,000, and I heard from them they wouldn't let us back in the arena that year either, no matter what we did. They just wouldn't let us in. And I don't blame them, but the only way we learn with this kind of robot is to do it. And that's when I decided to build a new one. And I figured by doing that, I'd double up the amount of fights I get and double up all the problems we find, because they're exactly the same robots. Yeah. And we find problems that apply to both. Yeah. And there's different problems we found in different fights over time. And that iteration in China was nice because there was a machine shop right next to where we're fighting. And when the self-riding didn't quite work because it was done the old way and it just didn't work, it would spin or the pipe would break. We made modifications on the CAD file and walked over next door and got them to make us to modify the spindle. So it's got like I forgot what you call it when you make it looks like a flower pattern, so it can't spin. And we did that in between fights, so those are the kind of changes we did over time. Changed the pull mechanism so it's a little longer and it self-rights with the slow, a slow spin. But we're using a contactor and to begin with, and it would be a very violent self-righting. And I knew we had to get a motor controller. So I work with a guy we worked on a motor controller for a ventilator together, Mike Lindbergh. He's the analog guy. I'm a digital guy, electrical engineer. And I did the FPGA to control the brushless motor controller on the ventilator, which is now saving lives, by the way, all over the world from Philips. But So he designed something unique for the spin, and we took that to China, and it kicked ass. We've iterated it 3 times, and now we have 2 units that went through all of China and all of BattleBots this year and never died. And we burned up 2 E-Techs. The specs on it are insane. So the specs are 1,800 amps continuous. It's 7,200 amps peak at 75 volts, but we only tested it at 60 because we run it at 60 volts. We run it 14S. But the iterations made it tougher and tougher over the years, and now it's pretty much indestructible. The unique thing, though, it's a quad bridge. It's not a full bridge. It's just one bank of FETs being modulated. And it's so much easier to get all that current. You get actually 4 times the current for the same amount of FETs. So and it's a pound. It weighs 1 pound. So it's not big. If I could have bought one, I would have bought it. Even if it cost $5,000, I would have bought a motor controller than spending
They're that much worth.
Tens of thousands of dollars to get this going and testing it and iterating it. And
But there's nothing
I
like
added
it out
Mike
there.
on the team. Yeah, just for that. I added him just because he had that expertise. And
I mean, it's a good enough reason to. I mean, we've spoken to teams in the past who I want to say, Jevin, when we spoke to the Mortis guys, when they were talking about their speed controllers from back in the early 2000s, they brought people onto the team because they had expertise that no one else had, and were things that were built and designed to way beyond specs that combat robots at the time had and probably still have today.
Just crazy.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Another being.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah, we burned up 2 E-Techs. One of them got so hot that the magnets demagnetized. I had to.
That's about right.
You know how strong those E-Tech magnets are? They're nothing. It's completely nothing. And that's the same motor controller that happened in China in the very, very last fight. Same motor controller we used throughout this whole BattleBot season. So it survived a lot. And it's almost like, gosh, you don't want to change it out because it's so good, but they wear out over time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another tough thing is spare parts and window replace parts. Well, another thing we did is we put these stickers on the motors, and the stickers on the motors will keep it at the hottest temperature it ever seen. And when a mini mag gets to a certain temperature, it's going to fail eventually. So, and we did lose fights in China because of mini mags burning up, but we used them from fight after fight after fight. Now we always use new ones at the beginning of the season, and we have those stickers on them. And if they get hot, I change them out. I mean, they might still be good, but it gives me spares if I need them. Yeah.
Makes
maintenance
sense.
Thing.
Another thing you changed this year as well, which I want to bring up, and I think Steve is kind of nodding in agreement, was the addition of a certain Mr. Maxim from Stinger the Killer Bee.
Yeah, that's so. I took 8 years off, and it was him who brought me back. So that really it was season 1 on ABC, and he invited me for the finals. So I got to be in there with him as a team and got to watch it on the big screen behind the scenes, and I just got obsessed again.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, after that, we met in Orange County and for lunch, and we talked and realized it's dark outside. What the heck? We were there 5 hours. we actually talked about BattleBots for 5 hours. So then when he retired, every single event we did, I called him and asked him and Wendy to come with us, come to China, come to BattleBots, and this was the. So and in the pit, he is amazing. He's a machine, and he's thinking all the time. His strategies are ridiculous. And we talked just night before last, after the Thursday. So it was Friday. We talked on the phone for like 2 hours because he had all these from watching it again. He had all these commentaries and insights that I don't see when I watch it. I can watch it. I don't see. So his strategies, his modifying tools. We have these carts that we hold the shells on, and I got them free from working for Philips. They're medical carts. They're really nice carts, but they were throwing them out, and they said, "Yeah, go ahead, take them." He modified them so they make them more optimal, and then he inspired me to modify them. I could fit 2 shells on it now. So
it's just small things like that, right?
Yeah, when you have someone that creativity and that strategy, he inspires you to be better for your own ideas. So that, and then working in the pits, he figured out better ways to put on the belt because you got to have a technique. You can't just muscle it in there. we had like Richard was on our team in China, and he would muscle it with a big screwdriver and ding up the pulleys. And Brent, who made these pulleys, he's a machinist. He's like, no,
All that
just
work.
drove him nuts. Yeah, and he showed him how to do it with finesse, and then Matt added to that finesse to make it a little easier. I mean, that's just some of the little things. There's I can't even describe all the things that Matt did.
Yep. You got Matt metrics in the background and Matt mechanics in the foreground. So it's
yeah. And then I had two robots too. I had both of them. I never had that before. That's the first time we ever had. Every night after a fight, we had two robots ready to fight. Every single night. There was not a single night that we only had one ready to fight.
A production must have loved you.
Yeah, we were always
after
there.
that incident in season 2.
Yeah. Well, we work hard to not let stuff like that happen again.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Even further back, I know we're kind of pushing the episode further back, but I want to talk a little bit about like your first entry into BattleBots, which was Rambite. How did that idea come about? Can you talk a little bit what you remember? Because what other chance do I have to ask you this question?
Yeah.
But the thing is, I remember seeing this robot. I remember seeing the fight with Slap 'em Silly. And I remember the most memorable thing about that fight is you getting flipped upside down and spinning your weapon up real fast and somehow self-righting yourself with just your weapon. I don't know. It just still sticks with me. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, just now I'm giving you the floor. Go ahead. Talk about anything you want about old school BattleBots.
That Slap 'em Silly was Rambite 2, right?
Yeah.
So let's go back before that.
Yeah, let's go earlier. Yeah,
So,
the thing that was a wheel hub.
watching-
It looked like a wheel hub.
It was a cooking pot.
Okay, there you go.
Aluminum cooking pot. It looked like a birthday cake.
There you go.
Carl Lewis, who really was the main, designer of that and builder. I did the electronics. He was in a running club and he had this aluminum cooking pot, and he bent and a 1 inch by 1 inch aluminum lip around it, and that's what we attached the blades to, and used the EV Warrior. I don't know if you remember those old surplus motors. They were around all the time to spin it. Sears, they were $9.99 at the time. Sears drills. He took 4 of those and made those as the drive. And we go to BattleBots. Our first fight was with the Bambino. It looks like a home plate with 2 aluminum bats on each side that slammed down. And the guy loved baseball, right? And we ended up winning that fight, the very first fight we ever did. I still have that Pog that they gave us in my wallet. I've carried it since then. So we're talking season 4, 2001. And that's the only one I have, by the way. All the other ones I give out to team members. And I'll carry that till I die.
That's your one.
It'll be with me. Yeah, it'll be with me in my coffin when I'm done.
Fantastic.
So so we ended up winning our first 4 fights, making it too deep into the TV round where we beat Erker Bounden. Erker Bounden in German, it's like a funny way to say Mr. Good Pounding. And then after that, we fought Salad, who was in the top 10. Mm-hmm. And Salad really owned us the whole fight. But at the end of that fight, he was smoking and dead. And they started counting him out, but the bell rang. So he got saved by the bell and he won that decision. He thought he lost. We thought we won. But if you watch the fight, it wasn't a close fight. I mean, he pretty much owned it.
Editing magic. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's always the way. It's always the way.
So the next year, we came up with the idea of what Whyachi does. Put all the weight out on the arm and you get more, if you just more weight out, spinning it the same RPM, you're going to get bigger hits. And that's when the first Megabyte was an arm spinner and Rambite. They both existed, and it was unstable. So the problem with having the weight in an arm in those 2 dimensions is when that arm hits, the robot itself spins vertically, and and we have that. It's a totally unstable design. It couldn't win, and it never did. It did a lot of Megabyte. Did a lot of damage. Well, sometimes you learn from that. Right? We learned from that. Lost a whole season and went back to make Megabyte into a big giant aluminum shell. It was a big 1/2-inch aluminum, and we started dominating. Megabyte went 1.5 years without losing it. We were just knocking.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, it was.
The times where all you could watch about BattleBots was on YouTube and just clips that people uploaded. Anytime I saw a Megabyte fight, it's just like, it's gonna do what it does.
It's winning.
Yeah.
But we learned some lessons there, and that was Last Rites, right? Tombstone's heavyweight.
Yep.
Caved in the aluminum shell.
Yeah.
And when it caved it in, it stopped it from spinning, and he wins that fight. And that's when I knew I had to go to an angle. So I had already been in talking with Terry Ewert, right? So we talked about ways to do that, and he actually helped me design the shell. And it's the same design today. I just iterate it and take those files and modify them. I'm not sure if he made the file for me or he told me how to make it, but one of the two. So once I had that, the first time we used that shell was in the 2003 National Championships. And in that's where Matt came up with the thing to hold the self-righting mask. He hid it from us. And when he waited till we got out of the arena and he unveiled it, and we're like, oh, shit. He owned us that whole fight, but he got stuck to the end. Yeah, I don't know if you saw that fight, but he ends up getting stuck on the arena with his mask at a bolt, and he couldn't get out.
I think that video kind of it kind of resurfaced when Hydra started posting about all the little V thing at the front recently. With
you're right.
It's funny how it all kind of came about again. It's great stuff.
Yeah, he really scammed us. We really thought he was going to do that, and the feeling we had when Matt did that to us, it was our hearts sunk because we knew crap, and he owned us, and that was not a good feeling. Yeah. And so we worked toward that. We didn't work toward a wedge. We have an answer for the wedge, but we didn't use it. So that we won't make that mistake again.
Absolutely not. I don't doubt it at all. Well, obviously, we've made it to the Bounty Hunter episode. Obviously, the prize for everyone is Son of Whyachi. We'll start with
money.
And money, of course, yes, and money. We'll start with fight number 1, shall we? Which I think everyone has been kind of talking about, which is Kraken versus Rusty.
Yes.
There he is in your background, Jevin. There's your boy.
Oh, what a guy.
I will say, before we gush a little bit about Rusty, because we are going to.
Oh.
Poor Matt, because
he didn't deserve that.
Because Kraken is one of the nicest robots, and they're such a lovely team, and it hurts me inside because as much as Rusty winning is wonderful, and everyone should appreciate the fact that Rusty won a fight against such a high caliber opponent as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
not Kraken. Come on.
You could see it all over his face in this fight.
Yeah, it's just the reaction.
Oh my god!
It's weird too because all they talked about. Yeah, go ahead. 2 bolts.
Two bolts that they didn't check over in their pit time. I think they'd replaced a load of stuff and then didn't check those 2 bolts that they were tightened properly, and they failed them in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame because all season, I think even in this episode, they talk about how durable Kraken is. And it's a nut that doesn't crack.
Mm-hmm.
And it cracks
But Kraken died so that Rusty could live.
Exactly.
I guess so.
Exactly. I mean, John, obviously, I'm sure you were kind of watching on with a bit of, in bit of interest, considering you may have fought one of these two later on. And, Kraken this season has been so good. It's made it to a bounty final already. They beat Witch Doctor. They beat, high caliber opponents, over the years. Surely it must have been kind of disbelief watching Rusty walk away with this one.
It would have been fun to fight either one just because I've never fought anything like those two robots. And the Kraken, we just loved being in those opera boxes when the Kraken fought. I always yelled, "Release the Kraken!" every time. And there was that old movie I grew up watching where the guy says that. There's 2 movies that they say that. So that's it was just he's always fun to watch that the fight because I never expected him to win a fight. When he keeps winning, it was really exciting. And then Rusty was had the right weapon for that mistake they made. That weapon, other weapons wouldn't even have made a difference, right? Lower weapons or whatever. But
it's kind of the angle it attacks from as well, right? Because it's any other hammer wouldn't necessarily hit that specific point. It's because of the way that Rusty's hammer drops sort of down rather than swings across.
They found the gap and they just pulled at it until such a time as it came loose.
And I bet from now on they'll have a list before every fight because that's what we did this year. You have a list and you give one guy on the team or one person. It was Anouk, Dave's daughter. That was her job between every fight, after and before, and she went to all of us and made sure and checked off a whole list of stuff.
Yeah. I have a very sore memory of high school. I was in First Tech Challenge, and we were seniors. I was my senior year. I'm like, this is the one. We're going to make the world championship. We're going to go. We're going to win states. This whole thing. We're dominating this regional tournament, and we're in first, and we've scored more points than anybody all day. we get to our first finals match, and we forget to plug in the power brick. We forget to plug in the Mindstorms brick, so nothing works. And it was one and you're done. So that whole day we go through and do everything, and then it just comes down to that. And every match after that, we had a checklist, and we ended up going to Worlds. So like that little thing, that little just a little checkpoint list, just to make sure you've got everything set the way you want it. Everything's exactly the way you want it before you lock that door or put it down and remove your hands and say, I'm done. It really does make that much of a difference, because your brain can only control so much stuff. We're human. There's only so many things you can keep track of.
When you've got a fight coming up and you're going, okay, so we need that done and we need that done. Oh, I need to be in an interview, or I need to go to the arena. We need to weigh it in. We need to check it's all there, check whatever. Okay, great. And you get to the arena and there's probably things that you've forgotten. Your mind just...
Once the lights are on, your brain's like, oh, pretty.
as well as that, obviously, not to kind of take away from the job that the three of them have done this year. Kraken normally has a much larger team that turn up, and it is one of the bigger ones in the competition. And there's only three of them this year. Army. They do. Maybe that made a difference. I don't know, but I think they can be happy with the season that they've had regardless. I mean, they've had some great fights, and I'm sure they'll come back in 2021 with a much more improved Kraken, and I can't wait to see it. But credit to Rusty. You've got to take the opportunities, I guess. when the opportunity
such disbelief watching this. You see Kraken dragging its airbag, and it's like, this is not going to happen.
I think this is the only fight where the result has been read out. I've physically punched the air.
Yeah. You could see Farouk smiling too when he saw it.
And you just... Oh man!
And the reaction of all the upper boxes as well. It was just
they
elation.
Went absolutely wild.
Yeah,
absolutely wild. Nothing has quite captured the hearts of the audience like Rusty has in the last few years.
Yeah.
It's just done. I mean, they speak about it all throughout this episode. Whenever they get the chance to interview David Eaton, they're just talking about what is it about Rusty that everyone loves, and it's. I'm not sure I can put it into words. He is just. You want to protect him, but also when he does win a fight, it's just next level. It is. I mean, I think it's the fact that you never expect him to win a fight, so when he does, it's just sheer
elation,
craziness.
Like the Rocky story and the Karate Kid. The underdog who should never even be in the ring, right? Rocky should have never been in that ring.
Yeah, and they said it in this episode, Rudy.
Yeah, that's right, Rudy. I made my girlfriend watch it.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
The movie, and they mentioned him, right? They mentioned Rusty. Rudy.
Yeah.
And he's like, who's that? I was like, you haven't seen that movie?
Yeah. The ending of that movie is legendary.
Like,
no one's watched
don't tell my brother. My brother's Notre Dame grad. I was like, don't tell him you didn't see it, because he won't talk to you anymore.
Yeah. What a classic.
Oh, dearie me. I think this will go down as a classic for BattleBots as well.
Definitely.
This is going to be the one. Do you remember that time when Rusty beat Kraken?
Do you remember when Rusty, Kraken, that robot that's been doing really well against the top 16 competitors all season. You remember that other robot, Rusty, just tore its face off and tore the airbag that operates the weapon out of it, so completely killed that bit. Yeah, that's a good moment, that is.
Love it.
Yeah, this is I think this is kind of why we all kind of enjoy the sport, because you can never prepare for anything. Anything can happen. Anyone can beat anyone on its day, and I think that's
luck is your biggest enemy in the arena.
Mm-hmm.
And Bunny brought it up a couple of weeks ago, where she heard from Ray, like a comment from Ray and probably other builders, that the most dangerous opponent is your next one. So no matter who you fight, anything can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about fight number 2. Our first rematch of the episode, which is Copperhead and Chronos. Obviously, they fought back in 2019, which apparently almost ended up as a double KO, didn't it? I want to say.
Close.
And did Chronos won it, didn't it? The first one.
It did. It took out the weapon.
Actually.
Yeah, that was the weapon
dislodged.
That was it. I remember now.
I hadn't. So, King of Bots was the first time I have ever seen a weapon dislodged from its mounting point. I think it's one of the first fights in the first series of King of Bots. It happened, and then I thought.
It might have been John that did it, actually, I think.
I think that was Megabyte against the Russian team.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, it was against Stingray.
It was like Yellow Cheese. I can't remember the name of it.
Stingray.
Yeah, that's the one.
Stingray. It was Stingray, yeah.
Yeah, and it was shocking. And then I thought, surely that's not going to happen in BattleBots. And then it happens in BattleBots, and it's Chronos to do it. And it's the most unassuming robot to do it, because you think, Chronos is So ring spinner, it might do well. Then completely tears out the weapon of Copperhead, flies it across the arena and wins the fight.
Right.
You just think, how?
I mean, Copperhead got its revenge here. I mean, poor old Chronos did. I think they had a pretty rough season by all accounts.
They exchanged motors because they couldn't get that E-Tech anymore, so they went to a brushless, and that brushless they never got it tuned to spin up. On paper, the brushless looks tougher than more torque than a E-Tech, but it just wasn't. You got to have the right motor controller for that to make it work. Yeah. He's going back to brush this year. I speak a lot with Jerry.
Yeah, I feel bad for him, man. He brings such a cool robot. The one that
a lot of character as well.
Yeah, it's just, and you don't see ring spinners often ever. Well, we had the Ringmaster briefly from the Duck group, and Hal Rucker and that whole group. But I mean, you don't see them very often, and it's cool when they work. The only thing about this, and I'm going to use props, is he's got his drive gear that's a small gear, and you have the ring gear that's large. If you've ever played with gears, a small gear, it takes many revolutions for this to go around, for this to just spin once, and I don't
know how much operation that little one has on the big one. I think that might just be for looks.
You think so?
I hope so.
Yeah. I don't know.
Then. I mean, John, I don't know if you know, John, if it's because obviously you fought Chronos as well before. You played Beyblade with them last year, didn't you?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. That's our first fight last season.
Yeah.
And then I saw him in China. So we hung out in China. He it's a really cool team. He has his team and everything has a really good look to him, and they were really popular. And watching Chronos in the test box in China was awesome. It was just one of the most amazing spinners I ever saw. And the way he was able to launch, because he has a ramp as opposed to a blade, and he was launching things into the ceiling, and it looked like it was a flipper. It was really awesome. Crazy. He did better with the brush. And I'd love to see him get all his kinks and bugs out.
Yeah.
And it'll be an awesome robot when he does.
It's strange that you say, because it's one of very, very few robots who have taken their name across. So they appeared as Chronos first on This Is Fighting Robots, and then came across to BattleBots with the same machine. I was surprised to see it be the same.
Yeah, usually there's weird production
copyrights,
contract stuff that you can't bring names over, kind of, because it's owned by the network.
Well, things like Tantrum changed to Boxing Champion when they went the other
way. Right, yeah.
Obviously, as well with yourself, John, you obviously go from Megabyte to Gigabyte.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's being safe. We don't want to have any legal troubles. It probably would have been okay to keep the same name. I just didn't want to risk it.
Sure.
Right.
Makes sense. Well, let's talk about your first fight then, John. Grabot, we last saw fighting Beta when it got its head caved in by the hammer, and this wasn't much better for them, really, was it?
They barely got out the square.
Beefy. That when I looked at that wedge, I'm like, oh crap! If I hit in the middle of that wedge, maybe we'd fly. So my goal was to do what I did, is hit the corner. We always do better when we hit corners, and he wasn't even drivable. I mean, he was kind of erratic, and I got past him, and I like to do that. You pass him, and then you just back up, and you hit a corner.
That camera angle where you see you back up and fling that wedge straight at the judges. It was
straight at his face.
perfect camera angle as well. Credit to the production on that one. That was spot on.
Shit chance, right place, right time. The wedge goes flying. The whole wedge.
Beautiful. Absolutely. I mean, there wasn't much fight to talk about, really, sadly.
No, it wasn't. Yeah. But if that wedge held on better, the whole robot would have flown, right?
Yeah.
And maybe us, too. We would have maybe flown into the wall. It would have been, 50-50 composition. But, and I didn't want to hit him again. I could have completely destroyed.
I mean, all his electronics were kind of hanging out, right? It was all...
Yeah, it's all hanging out, but I just feel bad because I know what it feels like to lose all what you spent in time and money.
I wonder if you've ever had your dress taken off in the ring, either this time or the last, either once or twice, rather.
You say it at the end of the episode where it's not you to go in for another hit.
Yeah.
Once it's done, and you leave well alone.
Yeah.
And there's two aspects to that. One is, first I'm thinking, is that hurting my chances to be a contender for the most damage? And the other one is, I don't want to take risk on my robot like Tombstone did in the semifinal, right? His battery, he hit him after the fight was over. His batteries came out and he didn't have spares. Why take those risks? So,
especially when the fight's won, and especially in like a tournament like this where there is literally cash on the line. You may as well take it easy and preserve yourself for later on, which obviously you did do. Yeah. But as I said, there was not much fight to talk about. Sadly, we'll get. Obviously, there's a lot more to come from Gigabyte, but we'll have to talk that through a little bit later on, and we'll move on to Big Dill and Perfect Phoenix.
Well.
Perfect Phoenix was not in a good way.
No, it wasn't.
This is post-end game, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the whole chassis is a funny banana shape.
It's not quite flat anymore, is it? I mean, we spoke to Pete Abramson before the round of 32, and he was talking about how Ray was, pressing that machine back into shape after every fight, because it at this point it is a 10-year-old robot, and it's not really designed with today's forces in mind. And, while it did do very well this year, give him credit where it's due. And, I'm sure Tyler probably didn't expect to turn up and win twice and get into the competition. There comes a point where the competition steps up a notch a little bit. And they got unlucky to fight the eventual winner in Endgame. Yeah. And it kind of exposed them in this fight against Big Dill. They
had to bodge together a weapon, it looks like, because that weapon was not sitting as flat.
Wasn't long enough, was it? Wasn't
No, but the strategy was sound. The idea was to cut the wheels, and it almost worked.
One of them did get cut, didn't it?
Yeah, there's a huge chunk out of the back left wheel. So
there's a wonderful moment at the very start where they do get lifted and put on top of the mini-bot.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God! What the world? Like a perfect little doorstop, basically. I mean,
well, yeah.
I don't understand the short blade. I mean, if he would have had a blade that actually stuck out, it would have knocked off Big Dill's lifter.
Yeah.
Big Dill would have had that, couldn't come in because the blade would have knocked that piece off. So I don't understand that weapon at all.
Interesting strategy. I wonder if it was just a necessity thing. I wonder what the status of the other blades were.
It may have been, like, if anything, because obviously Tyler's so good with his with his D2 kit. It may have been just to use the wedge as a strategy and try and outdrive him, which may have been the case because maybe the weapon motor was suffering at some point. I don't know. There's a lot of different things to look into.
It's let the smoke out a couple times.
Yeah, it has to.
From different places.
Same wedge from when it was Brutality, because Brutality's wedge was pretty kick-ass, and it was right on the ground. It was able to get under everybody. And Megabyte fought him twice, Brutality.
Yeah. And you guys killed the first one, Biohazard. How could you?
Yeah, lost the second one. Yeah. And the second one, he almost went upside down when his weapon hit our shell, and then he just stopped spinning and fought us as a wedge and just kind of owned us.
Strange.
But the first time, his welds gave out on that front wedge. But the wedge is, you can see on the floor, it's not actually straight flat across it.
Not anymore.
Big Dill had no problem getting underneath it.
No. It was nice to see Big Dill do its thing, because we've only seen it, obviously it beat Atom 94 way at the start of the season, and the other two opponents it had, Lockjaw and Rotator, are pretty high-end machines. They've both won bounties themselves. It was nice to see them, be able to get under an opponent, control the robot. You could see they were definitely trying to go for that out of the arena, weren't they? But they just couldn't quite.
It really benefited. I will say that Big Dill really does benefit from having Spicy Meatball there, because I don't think it had the mobility to really kind of keep up with Perfect Phoenix in this fight.
It was excellent teamwork between them and the Minibot.
Yes.
You have the Minibot there to get underneath, be the nuisance, and then sort of almost tee them up ready to go for the big
like
bot.
Needle and Tracer this year.
Exactly.
That's the idea of being able to slow your opponent down, or at least hinder them in a way where your big bot can really come in and do the big damage.
These are the sort of Minibot strategies I enjoy, because it's there and it's got a good purpose in the arena, as opposed to just being there to whiz about. And I do like the Copperhead snakes; they're good fun, but they're there for looks rather than doing something. And I'd rather see a Minibot do something.
Yeah.
But this was pretty cut and dry. Poor Perfect Phoenix just couldn't self-rate. No pole. Nothing there.
Maybe next time. Well, I think they are applying to the 2021 season, so we'll see them back. Who knows? Well, fight number 5, John. Back to you again. Your fight with Big Dill.
Yep. What was their strategy here?
my strategy is always to get behind him and hit him from behind, but Joy's too good.
Yeah.
You know, he's always going to be more maneuverable than Gigabyte.
Yeah.
You know, he's and it looked like he was tweaked on the very first hit. You know, he did do the bomb rush.
He went for the box rush, and he kind of he couldn't quite turn on that left side, could he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that really, you know, I think that helps. But the biggest thing is his wedge has two edges to catch. It's one in the middle and one on the side. Mm-hmm. And I knew eventually if we started hitting those edges, something's going to break as long as we don't. And I really expected him to survive the whole fight. You know, it's a tough robot, and his robots are always built really well. Mm-hmm. So I didn't expect him to actually die, but it did almost go to fight. I think there was only like 30 seconds left by the time he was. Mm-hmm. It was one of the longest fights we had, other than the Hydra fight.
Yeah. And that frame has seen a lot of iteration. We've seen that frame throughout the past seasons of Battle. We saw it with Warhawk. We saw it with I guess there's an iteration of there's got to be some cross breeding between Cat King.
It's the same.
There's a little bit there
between them and. Well, they
were on the same.
The first one.
Oh yeah, don't even get Jevin started on the lineage with that team. It's so stretchy.
Emmanuel was on the team for
a lot of sharing.
King of Bots and.
I just posted a picture of us eating at a hot pot in China, and you see the whole Cat King team, and it's like 5 teams now, 4 teams.
Yeah, exactly. it's ridiculous.
They're spreading like a plague, but it's a good plague.
I will say that at the start of the fight, you know, you do that beautiful little hovering thing that you do in midair, where like you are literally like a UFO when you bounce off the wedge. I love that kind of thing. The physics is just makes me happy. But there was a good few hits there where I thought, you know, you're hitting things that isn't big deal.
Yeah.
They were a very legitimate and credible threat to you guys. I think, you know, the improvements that we've talked about, you know, the small tweaks that you've made over the years and have made Gigabyte more reliable have really kind of shown in, particularly in this tournament, but obviously, you know, throughout the season. It was really nice to see that, you know, you weren't hitting things and dying a minute in. It's just really nice to see.
Of course, excluding the first fight. That was weird.
Well, yeah, but that's...
You know what I mean? It's the rest of the tournament was...
Yeah. Amazingly, we had almost no damage in that fight, except for the spindle. That's ready to fight again. We place the spindle and go to fight.
Yeah. But overall...
I say that this fight was a good example of, you know, yourselves running for 3 minutes and not really beating a sweat, really. It was very, very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have overkill on everything, you know, on the... The only reason we burned up E-Tex in the past is because we hardened them. And when we harden the E-Tex, we put a epoxy on the armature, which makes it a lot hotter. Mm-hmm. And we separate them from the magnet from the armature a little bit. Again, makes more current, makes it hotter, but it's more durable. It can handle the hits. So we don't lose them by hits anymore. We lose them through heat, you know, and that's something we got to figure it out and deal with. But we're changing motors this year. We're going to the Lemco motor. So
okay.
We should.
All right, cool. Big time.
Interesting. Fight number 6.
Well, it had to come to an end at some
Imagine
point,
saying at the start of the season in a legitimate, you know, knockout competition that Rusty would fight Copperhead. No one would have believed you. Not one person. It kind of went as we all really expected, didn't it? But
it did fall that, except for that one hit that had everyone on the Copperhead team worried.
Yep,
because they got that.
Rusty gets it in. And the drum stops.
That weapon, it just hits it. The thing it reminds me of, in the best possible way, is Nuts 2 from Robot Wars, because nothing, like, no one in their right mind expected Nuts to be able to hit, you know, concussions, wheel bearings out, or hit Android in such a way where the hydraulic fluid would come out. It's
carbides chain.
Or carbides chain, exactly. And it's that kind of awkward to armor area, or, you know, place where you plan for a lot of eventualities, but you don't expect to get hit in certain places, and that is one of the things maybe with Kraken and again with the Copperhead fight. It gets just in, and if they'd have angled it slightly differently and it hits the weapon belt,
could have been game over. Copperhead.
Very different fight, isn't it? Then, but unfortunately,
so Robert Cohen spoke about he turned the weapon off at that point. I don't know how true that is because they looked worried.
They did look a bit concerned.
I think that might be a little bit of trying to save face, but I'm not sure. I wasn't there. I can't possibly say. But, you know, I imagine that it's the sort of hit you would want to turn the weapon off for because
You don't want to jam it up, do you? We don't want
Yeah,
to pull it through, do
basically.
you, really?
You imagine Rusty is probably the perfect robot to pull through your system and win, because Rusty just keeps going. You've got the weapon system with the pipes on the outside. There's perfect entanglement. They're perfectly legal entanglement at this point, but yeah.
It's just Rusty is just a joy, isn't it? And then seeing everyone, you know, Pete, bless him as well, celebrating when he's come on, self-right, Rusty, yes, and it did, and it was
dead.
it was dead.
I thought it was interesting how Rusty was able to take the hit better than Gigabyte. I mean, when we hit Copperhead, we fly across the arena, turn upside down. They're huge hits, and I think it's because his sides are flat. And we have that angle that go under, and we get hit directly by his weapon. The whole weight and force, where Rusty's kind of getting scraped on his flat sides.
Yeah.
So I found that it really made me think a little more about how to redesign a shell to handle, to handle those kind of robots.
It's almost like you want to make something that like ablates, but it's like you don't want to be unbalanced. You know what I mean? Where like you're not having all that energy go through a solid object. I know Rusty has armored sides, but let's say that they're bendy a little bit.
They give. Could be part of it that they do give. They break and they come away in such a way that does mean that it just topples over a little bit on its side, and then it can get back up again.
I think that's the kind of effect. Yeah, exactly. Because the Copperhead couldn't get a bite, and I think that's the kind of idea that Beta have been going for with their kind of USS armor, which it's a good idea. It's just they haven't quite got it. Maybe they need
Rusty here used just a completely flat panel on the front, the Face Saver 3000, that went almost all the way to the floor. And whenever Copperhead hit it, it didn't go anywhere. It just kept hitting it and nothing. I mean, that panel probably still exists because it survived the fight.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what Beta needs. Maybe Beta just needs a Face Saver 3000 for the next season. Who knows? You've talked a bit about your previous fight with Copperhead, John. How did you feel about fighting them again? Because obviously we saw what happened last time with as Steve eloquently put it, the undressing of Gigabyte.
Well, I knew it was going to be a different fight. I mean, he's not going to get. First of all, we figured out the problem with the floor, and not. If you watch that first fight, we never drove. There was no driving in that fight at all. The bottom spun underneath it, so. That and the spindle, we fixed those two things, and I made, Mike and Matt both did spin up on different fights, and we went out and spent 2-3 hours spinning up over and over and over in the test arena. So we would always get in line and get in the test arena after that first fight. So we've already been successful before this in getting up to speed and making sure that we get to the center and up to speed. And I knew the spindle wasn't going to break. We had one made out of 7075 from a Riker machine shop down in Carlsbad. Someone drove it down, the piece of aluminum, and drove it back up the next day. So I know those two problems were gone. So I knew it would be a different fight, and I figured someone was going to stop working. And I didn't think it was going to be me. So, I was hoping that they'd stop working and then didn't have to worry about a decision. So if that went to decision, I don't know if we would have won it.
It's a tough one to call, really, because obviously it depends if they're going to see yourselves fly, because obviously you must have thought you're going to be flying through the air at some point. That obviously is very visual for the judges to see, and that is going to stick in their minds maybe more than you taking chunks out of Copperhead. But as you said, it was a very different fight. Obviously, Copperhead at this point have had a few fights where they've kind of struggled in terms of, stayability, let's say, in fights where they, the longer the fight goes on. We saw it against Black Dragon, where they just slowly started to get tired towards the end. Same against Mammoth as well, to a degree.
Yeah.
And when you've got something like Gigabyte hitting it, where the weapon has been working throughout, it really affected them quite badly. And it was a very nice bookend to your season, I thought, where you obviously had that awful start against Copperhead in the first fight, and then in this fight you get to fight them a second time and show how good you have been.
Yeah, and you can just celebrating that fight. It was really, for the whole team, this fight was more important than any fight we ever did.
Yeah.
And we were all almost in tears after this fight. It was just,
I believe it.
Yeah, it was such an amazing fight. And, that shell took some damage. That's our light shell. It's not really that thick, and it's not meant to take these big, giant hits. And a side of it, amazingly, is flat. It's almost like it's, the Shredderator flat side shells. Yeah. A side of that shell right now is flat from and you take that into account with Rusty in Copperhead, and again, we're thinking of different ways to design the shell so that won't happen again. That we won't get hit so hard that it flattens the shell. And the very first hit of this fight broke one of those blades completely. So the hit from Copperhead to us hit the blade directly, and it shattered that blade into 3 pieces.
Yeah.
It's a S7. So from that point on, there's one blade left, and it's hanging out. It's not even totally on there, and we're unstable. So it was very hard to drive. At the point, at the time, I didn't think we lost a blade. I thought I was having problems driving. And it wasn't until the very end when Matt let off on the spin and that vibration slowed down, and it was real easy to drive again. So then I realized, there's nothing wrong with our drive system. It was entirely having an unstable spin of the shell. And it's almost, you got to look at to even see that instability, you look at the mast, how it, from the center, how it's shaking compared to everything else. And you can, it kind of magnifies that vibration. But I mean, it was still drivable. It just was a lot harder to drive at that point.
What was it like to finally be able to drive your own robot? I know you brought it up in this episode. I don't know if was it Brent who was the main driver? Was it Brent Riker who was the main driver? Or was it just bounced around?
For Megabyte and BattleBots, it's been Carl Lewis.
Okay.
And then we went with Mark.
Okay.
The guy that was on our team at the time. Because of how well he drove Lucky. We took Lucky. Mark Demers brought Lucky to my house in Escondido, and Mark and I took Lucky up to RoboGames, and we did really well with Mark driving. I don't know if you know that, but I think he took third place. He only lost split decisions to Minotaur and the guy that wins it every year, Gary Jin.
Oh yeah, with
so,
original sin.
I mean, really good tournament. We completely owned Sewer Snake, which is a tough thing.
Yeah, it is a tough thing.
Because of that, I let Mark drive, and I think it was a disaster. If you watched the driving last season, it was, in my opinion, we all think it was a disaster. And I had so many people coming up to me and was like, "What the heck? How come in KOB Megabyte drives so much better? It's so much better." And I was driving the whole time in China. I drove every single fight in China.
There's
and then
some wonderful
realized,
shots in King of Bots. So just zooming in on you, just super focused and about to go in for the kill.
Yeah, and so after thinking about it and thinking, I have enough experience now. I'm gonna take responsibility. I'm gonna drive my own robot. I'm not gonna delegate that anymore. And this was the first season ever that I ever drove in BattleBots.
Clearly it made at least a bit of a difference.
Yeah.
Before we do talk about the final, I do want to talk a little bit more about Copperhead, because obviously we mentioned throughout this season the wonderful artwork on Copperhead's drum, and once again, throughout this whole episode, you see every fight has a different drawing and painting on, which is all hand done by one of the team, and it's just, I love that kind of thing, and I credit to I think, I can't remember who it is on the team. I think it's one of the women on the team, but I can't remember.
It's what's his name? That's gone as well. Robert Cohen's wife.
Oh, okay.
Or partner. Does all the artwork.
There is a Imager link somewhere. We'll try and find that and put it in the description, because honestly, it's beautiful.
She takes a picture of the edge of the drum. She draws it out on the iPad, and then she copies it from the iPad onto the drum itself. It is how she manages to get it just perfect between the two. It's just fantastic.
I have a really good picture that I took right before that fight, right before the second fight of the drawing that they had. And mentioned Gigabyte and had a little drawing of it and a snake, and it was really cool. It was.
Well, of course, they didn't have it on the first fight with you guys before, did they? I think they had it for. I want to say the first fight they did it for was Black Dragon, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I didn't notice it until that second fight with them.
Yeah, I think. So it's nice that you actually end up getting a little drawing in the end as well, which is poor P1. P1 didn't get a drawing.
I don't think P1 was really in there long enough to get a drawing.
No,
you could have had a snake in a slot car. It would have been awesome.
Never mind. But we'll leave a description link.
Her name is Kim Cohen.
There you go.
Perfect.
We'll leave a link in the description for the Imager artwork stuff for Copperhead's drum. Which leaves us to the bounty fight. Now, of course, John, you've been having a little bit of trouble with the old Whyachi boys this year, because obviously you fought Hydra with the great banter that you both teams have been having over social media. A bit of back and forth, and it kind of built up quite nicely to this. I know it was months ago when this was being filmed, but it all kind of came together nicely, and a fight against a legend in their own right, Son of Whyachi.
And then I looked at it almost as a chance to get revenge from the Hydra fight.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But it's the same driver, and if you look at it from a driver point of view, we got revenge on both of our losses.
Exactly.
In some way, at least in some little way. And I knew we would do well in this fight because it's that rock scissors paper. We're the rock to his scissors because of the angle of our shell, and we used our heavy, thick shell, and I didn't think he would damage it. We fought against super heavyweights when it was Megabyte. We moved Megabyte up to super heavyweight, and we dominated that class for a while with a 220 pounder, and it survived. That shell with the angle survives huge hits, especially when they're delivered right in the center of the shell. It's the low hits like from Copperhead really messed us up, but a horizontal spinner against us, we do really well. I mean, that's just historically these kind of robots without a wedge. If they have a wedge, like Brutality's wedge was pretty kick-ass, it's a different fight. But without a wedge, and even going up until the fight, I thought they were going to take their bar off and put a big wedge on. I just had that in my head that we're going to be.
You say it in the episode. You say,
I did
maybe don't fight us as a wedge.
But that was a nightmare I had. And then when I realized nobody would allow him to do that, he would be disgraced if he did.
Weirder things
like
have happened.
You imagine
They put a bike rack on Hydra. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's all the way up to the bounty match, and the bounty is just this massive wedge calling itself Son of Whyachi.
That would have been hysterical, though.
I mean,
Even just to leave it there,
was...
lead it up to the box, just to have it there, just to play mind games.
Yeah.
Like
First and
what was
foremost,
it? What was it?
was-
Like Matt Spurk carrying the bike rack across.
Yeah.
just like huge out.
Yeah, just to mess
It
them
was
up.
wonderful to see Son of Whyachi hit, bearing in
Yes.
mind at the end of last year, or end of 2019 even now, because we're in 2021, but they said that Son of Whyachi is being retired.
Yeah.
And everyone thought, well, it's the end of an era, and that's it. This year's announcement of the teams coming out, hang on a minute, that's Son of Whyachi, what's it doing there?
Yeah.
And yeah, to have them in a fight, and for Jake to have it, the first time that he's driven it in the box is this bounty match as well, like ever, in fact, he hasn't ever driven that robot.
Yeah.
He was clearly loving it as well, wasn't he? He was fully, invested in it.
He was playing up to it.
He didn't obviously he kept making yourself, go and get it, go and kill it.
I drew similarities of you taking your dad's car out for the first time and absolutely trashing it. It was exactly like this fight.
It was wonderful. I mean, it wasn't much of a fight again because they got turned over, and as we all know,
they
hit.
managed to hit the pole. The first thing they did was hit the pole, and that was their undoing because the next time they ride up the wedge of Gigabyte, hit the stump that's left of the pole, and it just knocks them sideways.
Yeah. Bouncing off the floor a little bit, and then that's the end of it. There's no way that robot's getting back over.
So there was another bit of damage. A lot of people, you don't even notice it, but if you zoom in on a picture of Gigabyte at the end, there's a pulley that the shell sits on, and it has a lip that comes up. He hit that edge of the pulley, and it shattered that whole piece. So, the bearings sit at like 4 inches apart, and the bearing had dropped down on top of the other bearing because it didn't have that piece of aluminum on the pulley anymore. So that didn't cause any damage, which is a shock. If someone said, what happens if this happens? I thought the shell would come off.
Yeah.
But it seemed to stay intact for that whole fight. And I didn't even know it until after the fight when we were taking the shell off. I'm like, what the heck happened to the pulley?
Such a strange failure you can only get with such a high energy robot.
I mean, obviously Son of Whyachi did end up losing the fight. It is likely that we're not going to see it ever again, which does make me a little bit sad. Obviously it in its own right has won BattleBots, once upon a time back in the early 2000s. A nice send-off, I think. It wasn't when Bronco did its last fight with, Rotated, we just didn't get to see it do its thing. Ice Wave really struggled in its fight as well. Son of Whyachi,
a lot of the bounties had a lot of the legends had a hard time. Were they 4 and 2? The hunters?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
The only two that won
Witch Doctor
and Witch Doctor.
Yeah. But Son of Whyachi at least, I think, gave a little bit more of an impression than say the other returnees, let's say that didn't compete in the main season. But Gigabyte was fearsome throughout this, John. I mean, it must have been very satisfying. Like not necessarily just winning the tournament, but just watching how well Gigabyte performed. It must have been a nice relief after the last couple of years where things necessarily haven't gone your way.
Yeah, I mean, we started out last season 2-0, and just the next 2 fights didn't go well, and it was a combination of some design changes I made that were a disaster. The blades were breaking every fight, and I made them thicker in the vertical dimension, but a little bit thinner in the horizontal, and all the hits in the horizontal. Yeah. So that was not a good idea. So we fixed that this season. That's just one of the many little things that was. The motor controllers were a big problem, and then driving, last season was a big problem. The huge fight was something we just didn't expect.
That's what I want to say. I don't want you to be too hard on yourself, because that huge fight was strange in its own right, with how Huge decided to go on attacking you and that little sneakiness of Jonathan Schultz. Spinning down and getting the right measurement of the blade. That's
clever, but
Dinker.
Yeah, we have this big mechanism for him now. It's just for Huge, and it's a big piece of AR 500 with a blade on it that sits on top, and we don't put our normal blades on. And it's going to look like a big helicopter, but it's it's a 1/4-inch AR, and I don't think his blade's going to go through that angle. So
and the Witch Doctor fight.
I mean, that was brutal, wasn't it?
Yeah, again, we didn't get up to speed. We never got up to speed in that fight, and even though we were counted out, I found out later the reason we were counted out is because the driver decided not to drive anymore, and he did that. He knew that I wanted to go the distance every fight, and we did. That was the only fight we got counted out. That season, right? It was that fight, and my goal was to just I didn't care if we lost by decision, and that that just
it looks stronger on paper that if you go the full 3 minutes against quite a high kinetic energy robot or a big name in the sport like Witch Doctor,
it does
that you're more likely to get through to the selection. As it happened, you were selected, or you weren't selected, but you were put into the winning your in and couldn't quite make it there because of running out of parts or things not going your way. But it's always going to look better if you can go the full 3 minutes.
Right, and that was my goal, and I said that in the interviews. My goal is to just make the whole fight, win or lose. If we can, make the whole fight, it's a success. And we came close, 10 seconds. You just had to drive around for 10 seconds. And we did lose a wheel because we forgot to tighten a bolt. It was one of the things that we didn't have a list. But that was 3 wheels working. There was just one not working. And it wasn't that big of a deal. We were still driving at the point. And that, I still get upset when I think about it, because it was it was the whole team's priority for him to take it on himself to decide, I don't want to get hit anymore. It just was something.
I mean, I understand it, but at the same time, like, if you're going to put your robot in with the best, like particularly against a Witch Doctor that was in such good form, then, you may as well
especially
send it,
year.
Right? Obviously, we talked a little bit about the win in your in. Obviously, you now found out you may well have beaten Son of Whyachi had you qualified last year, which was something else. Wrapping things up a little bit. Obviously, this year Gigabyte, I think, has had its best season in BattleBots since it's returned.
Yeah, easily.
By a big margin. We have more wins this season than all the seasons put together.
I know, yeah.
Well, exactly.
7 wins by knockout. I mean, we didn't even have 7 fights, I don't think, between the 2 seasons.
What's it going to take for Gigabyte to go that little next step? Because obviously you end up in the top 16. You lost to the 1 seed Hydra, which, okay, it's the 1 seed and it's Hydra. Hydra did very well.
And it was a very good match.
And it was a great, I mean, that hit, you know which hit it is if you're listening, that hit where it pings from one wall to the next. Beautiful. Anyway, and obviously you fought Copperhead and then you went and beat them later on. So you've lost 1 fight, maybe. You've avenged 1 loss. You didn't maybe avenge the other one. Some degree against Son of Whyachi, but not the same robot. What's it going to take for Gigabyte to become the winner of BattleBots, let's say?
So we are working on a number of improvements, and one of them is that E-Tech motor. And at the end of the Hydra fight, that motor burned up. So there was 10 seconds of no spin. And that's right when his arm was stuck up too.
Yeah.
So at the same time his arm is stuck up, our E-Tech motor burned out. So we're going to a Lemco. It's they have a battle hardened version, and they call it the open frame, and it uses billet aluminum, so it's machined top and bottom, and it can be mounted, shock mounted top and bottom. We don't shock mount the E-Tech at all. It's rigidly mounted to our, and it just doesn't have that ability to shock mount it like this motor does. So I think that it's not only higher torque, it's hardened to begin with. We don't have to make all those changes we made to the E-Tech, but I think it will be more durable. So there's one thing there, that even getting that last hit at the end of that fight would have helped a little.
It would have been a lasting impression with the judges, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would have been enough to. Yeah, it wouldn't have been enough to win that fight. But another thing is we got to deal with wedges. Wedges getting under us. Doesn't matter if you have a vertical spinner or not. We have a problem with wedges, and I do have an answer to that. There's been one fight where I used it in China, and it sort of worked. We had a driving problem, and Richard, who was doing the spin at the time, just spun it up, and it spin it. So this fork-mounted, this anti-wedge device was spinning, and it bent. So we couldn't spin after that, but we were able to, he didn't push us around, and we were able to get him stuck on the wall and won that fight, even as a pushy robot. So it's something we have to perfect, and until I can use it multiple times, I don't think it's going to get perfected. But we have the weight budget. So we definitely have the weight budget to put in. Another thing we're doing is multibots. So we've already got 7 multibots going. And found out that the rules say they have to have an active weapon in order to use more than one. Otherwise, it's just one. So we're making little active weapons. Matt has 2. He's putting flamethrowers on the 2 he has.
Oh, so that's what he was testing. It's not.
Is that for a mini bot?
Yeah.
That flame is massive.
We thought it was going to be Stinger.
Yeah.
No, and then I'm just actuating the wedge with the little servo. It's going to be useless, but Duck's actuation is almost useless. So
weaponry.
It counts as a active weapon. So we can put, we can put up to 7 of them in there if we use the light shell.
That'll help.
And we want to do what happened in the Big Dill fight, where he was able to get high center, and if we can high center a robot
and drive
around it, that we're hoping to have, and that also gets team members more involved, because now they have a robot they got to practice with. And I think getting the team involved is a big deal. This year, the team was so involved. Everybody had a task, everybody contributed, from making the list to painting the shell, which I used to have to do myself, putting the letters on. By delegating things, it allows me to get things done while I'm in an interview, right? The robot's getting built. I don't know how Dave Eaton does it, right? He's in an interview. His robot needs to get fixed, and he has only 1. We had 2. Yeah. So when I'm in an interview, my team's working on the one that hasn't been fixed already. So they're getting that one ready. And that really makes a difference, having the 2 resources and having a team that comes together and figures out how to do everything. I spent time when we first got there going over, taking it apart and putting it together on both robots. I did that for the whole team was sitting around there. And then after the first one, they did it while I stood and watched, and they figured it out. They were able to do everything with me, and it didn't take long. Everyone on my team is brilliant in one way or another. It's just ridiculous how many smart people that I was able to convince to be on the team. So I'm really blessed when it comes to that, for sure.
Yeah, it's the one thing you don't see on TV is how important a really good pit crew is. I mean, it's not like F1 or NASCAR where you can see them actually working on the cars. This is all backstage, and they can film little bits and pieces here and there, but it's not the same feeling as being like at a live event. When live events come back, guys, if there's places to go, if they have places for fans to walk through the pits, get a feel for this. Get a feel for what you see on TV, because it's a whole different dynamic if there's areas that they can actually have guests kind of walk through and like peek at the pits and kind of see what we all do. It's a really cool aspect that you don't get to see on TV, and it's clearly very valuable, because had you not had that group around you, I don't know. Who knows where Gigabyte would be? You know what I mean? I think you say that for a lot of teams.
It'd be really good to have a Jenny Taft segment where they talk a bit more about the pit crews, because there are some really good ones this season.
We saw a lot less of her this year, honestly.
Yeah, I think that was a COVID thing, because obviously she can't cross bubbles and do all that too much. But I mean, we heard from Pete Abramson that the Black Dragon team are like an F1 pit crew, that they get it all apart and put it all back together in between fights, and it's just incredible. But it'd be amazing to see some of that side of things for the other teams as well.
Yep.
Because I feel sometimes that the rest of the people who are on the teams get a little bit less screen time than they deserve, because they're all there and they're all helping and they all have really good functions and forms and they work well together.
All those essential workers.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And
we stole some members from Team Lucky too.
Nice. Well, you were talking about Mark earlier.
You fought them before as well. You fought in the Desperado tournament a couple of years ago, didn't you?
Yeah, we did, and we lost because our mast broke when he flipped us upside down, and we couldn't start, and it ended that way.
That was it.
But Dave Jansen and his daughter Anouk, they're on Team Lucky, and Lucky didn't come, so Mark's like, sure, they can be on your team, and now it's like, what team do we want to be on now?
Right.
So we already talked to Greg about pitting next to each other so that they can kind of be on both of our teams.
Oh, brilliant. Nice. Fantastic stuff.
And it's nice to see. I know you talked a little bit about the paint, but if anything has proven, we've proven that Firefox is better than Google Chrome. So just upgrade Firefox, upgrade this version. I don't know.
This podcast is not sponsored by Mozilla.
I do like the Fire.
The change was all about work. I didn't want to spend the time making the three or four colors.
It looks real cool. When it spins up and you kind of have
it looks a lot better in motion. Yeah, it looks a lot better in motion.
My eyes hurt with the old version.
It almost like has a flicker of flames.
Yeah,
super cool.
And we got those stickers made by one of our sponsors, Max Amps, and
I believe it.
CAD'd it out so it would fit the shell perfectly. So I sent them a DXF file of the CAD of the output, and they could input that into their software and make this really nice. And they sent us a whole stack of them. So
nice.
They're actually more durable than you think, because they have to get hit directly to get taken out. So you can touch them up a little bit or replace them.
Yeah. This version's definitely grown on me. I will say the first time I saw it, I'm like, I missed the colors.
I thought the Google Chrome logo. I thought I was going to miss it more than I did. But the more I watched Gigabyte with the new look, I suppose it
really sharp.
On me. Yeah, absolutely.
Very clean, very sharp.
Well, it's good that it's going to have that look. Is going to have a good, because of how well we did, right? So it's going to be correlated. Being better than
that's what I mean.
It's all in the paint. It's all in the paint.
Right? Well, that's why I stick with the Invader look, which I loved. My daughter came up with that idea.
It was really cool.
Glow in a dark green paint with the aliens. I still like that. And the shirt's even better than anyone's we've had, but I just couldn't keep that. The feeling of that season was such a disappointment. We worked hard on getting that back together to make that make that fight, and then never got another fight. It was
the old adage.
And and my daughter was there, and she's the one that came up with the idea, and I was almost in tears, and she's like, Dad, it's not a failure unless you quit, unless you let it be a failure. Instead, it's a learning experience, and it just changed my whole demeanor at that point. Like, that's true, and I'm not going to quit. I'm going to come back.
Let that particular sleeping dog lie, and then just grow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much summed everything up. John, thank you very much for joining us. And I'll have to do a little bit of a thank you to all the other guests who joined us for BattleBots Bounty Hunters. So
that's
Victor.
BattleBots 2020.
I know, the whole thing. Victor Soto, Jack Tweedy, Ray Billings, Nick Buchholz, Bunny Sorial, and of course, John today. Thank you very much all for your time. We're actually going to have our break, guys. We're actually going to have our holiday for a few weeks.
Yay!
We've waited for months, and here we are.
We will be back.
There's back.
2 more episodes, I believe, until
100 podcasts.
A rather large number.
Yeah. Well, we're looking at doing something quite special for episode 100. I shan't reveal what it is just yet, but we're working on something. Episode 99, though, at some point in the near future, will be finally covering the 2016 season. We haven't done it yet.
Woo!
We're finally going to do it.
I have so many things I want to say about 2016.
Oh, there's a lot to unpack there.
ABC.
That was 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
Wow. We'll get to that at some point, but it won't be for a few weeks. We are actually going to have a little bit of detox time, a little bit of relaxation before it all starts again, because of course 2021 season is around the corner by all accounts.
Yep.
We'll have to keep an eye out for what news comes from that, but until then, we'll have to see. So, with that said, I have been Sam Elliott 64.
I've been Steve the American Killjoy.
I have been Walter Woodrow.
And I'm John Mladenik of Gigabyte.
And the three of us will see you at some point in the near future. Keep safe, everyone. Hopefully, you've enjoyed the last 21 weeks worth of us rambling to you. It's been that long. And yeah, we'll see you hopefully soon. Take care, everyone.
Mingo 2021.